How do character arcs work in a reverse chronology? My name is Gina. I'm an author, editor, publishing professional. I help you make your writing better. Anytime you have a story structure or a story style that is not done very often, it is usually because it is really difficult to pull off in a way that is satisfying for the audience. This is not me discouraging you from doing this, by the way. This is just me acknowledging that the reason we don't see a ton of reverse chronology, and I know immediately people will be like, I read this one. I know. There are some of them out there, but you have to admit that it is not as common as seeing a story told in proper chronological order. Reverse chronology is less common, and that's because it is harder to do. It is also more difficult for the audience. The audience comes into a story with a set of expectations, and when you mess around with those expectations, you have to tell your story a little bit better. You have to be better than the average in order to get people to trust you. Audiences come to stories with certain expectations, and if you are not going to meet those expectations, you kind of have to exceed them. So if you're doing anything different, you have to be better than average in order to do that. So if you're trying to do reverse chronology, it means that this is harder to do than an average story. You have a set of higher expectations, fair or unfair. We can debate about that separately, but you have a set of higher expectations in front of you. So a lot of people don't do this because is it going to pay off? I put in a lot of extra work. I worked really hard on it and it still fell flat. It's harder to do. The biggest reason why this is difficult to do is because the story still has to meet or like closely kind of sort of meet all of the story beats that the audience expects. We still have to have something at the beginning that lets us know what is going on so we understand the structure that this story is being told in. Then there has to be something that feels like it is kicking the story off, but this is near the end of the actual story, but it still has to feel like, oh, this is the thing that is putting us on this path in order to try to figure out what happened. And then you have to do rising and falling action, but leading back to the thing that started it all. And you have to have the story arc feels familiar while the character arcs are going in reverse. And this is not the same thing as a tragedy in which the entire story is told in the same order, but the character arc is inverted, so his high point is normally a low and vice versa. So tragedies are structured differently than a reverse chronology, and those are still structured differently than a traditional chronology. If you are going to attempt doing this, I would recommend plotting it out in chronological order, but ignoring story beats as you do so. Just plot out, is this plausible? Does this make sense for characters to do X that causes Y that leads to Z? Like plot it out in chronological order, and then start going through it backwards and start adding your story beats and realizing where you might need to cut or move things around in order to make that story structure feel correct.